If you think about what photography is recording, it's recording a fragmentary sensation that you intuit as being potential. All these things are vague, fragmentary, potential, intuition. They're not substantial, but they're essential. They are what define you as the being you are and the artist you are. So if you're looking to be a photographic artist, then you're going to be searching for your identity on the street. You're not looking for pictures. You're looking for what is it that makes me go, because that is inspiration, right?
Yeah,
you intake your breath, which means your system, your sensory being has been shocked by something in front of you that manifests itself out of the chaos of everyday reality. You're looking for these moments of transformation.
This week's guest is Joel Meyerowitz, the pioneering photographer who first took to shooting the streets of New York in 1962 and went on to change the attitudes of the art world towards colour photography, when black and white was considered the only respectable medium. Inspired by the likes of Robert Frank and Gary Winogrand to wander in search of decisive moments, Meyerowitz has gone on to become one of the most authoritative names in the history of street photography. He is co-author of Bystander, the standard work in the genre, and Beyond the Streets has produced classics in portrait and landscape photography, like Redheads and Cape Light. His peerless reputation made him the only photographer given unimpeded access to photograph Ground Zero in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. 60 books and 350 exhibitions later, Meyerowitz is about to present a major retrospective in Spain of early and unseen works shot on his travels around Europe between 1966 and 1967. I'm Matthew Beaman, Monocle's photography director, and I spoke to Joel Meyerowitz on The Big Interview. Joel Meyerowitz, welcome to The Big Interview.
Thank you.
Before we get stuck into your new exhibition, I'd like to talk about your experiences growing up in New York a bit and what prompted you to pick up a camera in the first place. I know you had a background as an art director, so was there something that happened during your time as an art director which inspired you to...
Yes, one of those life-changing events that was totally unexpected.
Yeah.
I was actually a painter, studying painting in university, and then I was doing graduate school in art history in New York, and I had a job as a junior art director for a small agency. And I had designed a booklet for 10 teens that my boss was trying to sell products to young girls before they were teenagers. This is in 1962. And so I had designed a booklet, and my boss hired Robert Frank, who was a good friend of his. My boss was a guy named Harry Gordon, and he was friends with Dan Arbus and Winogrand and Lee Friedlander. And they were all the same age. They were about 10 years older than me. Anyway, he sent me down to watch Robert make the photographs for this book. And I knew nothing about photography. I was a painter. And when I was watching Robert photograph, I saw that he anticipated what was going to happen right in front of him. He wasn't really directing these two little girls who were doing after-school activities, but every time they did something, a gesture that had a particular kind of lift to it, a moment, he was there, and I would hear the click just as the gesture reached its epiphany in a way. And I thought, wow, this guy has timing and he understands something's going to happen. And all these ordinary things have a moment of beauty in them. And, I just recognized that. And then when I went out on the street after the shoot, the street was alive to me in a way that I had never experienced before. Something as simple as a person hailing a taxi with that outstretched New York gesture, or someone who was carrying heavy bags of groceries home and they were bent over and stooped under it. And suddenly the poignancy of human behavior and ordinary street life was stunning to me. And instead of getting on a bus and going back to my office on 53rd and 5th, I walked it, which wasn't a big deal, but I walked it because I wanted to be in the world. And I couldn't stop seeing small moments that had big feelings in them. At least that's what it meant to me at that moment. And I came into my boss's office when I finally got there, and he said, "How was the shoot?" And I said, "Harry, it was absolutely fantastic. I'm quitting the job. I'm quitting on Friday." And he said, "Oh, no, was it really bad?" I said, No, it was great, but I saw something that I never understood before." And I said, I want to be a photographer. I saw these moments, and I explained to him what I just said.
Yeah.
And he said to me, "Do you have a camera, Joel?" I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Schmuck, you need a camera." And he reached into his drawer, and he said, "Here, use this until you get a camera." And he gave me his Pentax. And at lunchtime, I went out and I bought 2 rolls of color film. And that was it. The guy said to me, "What do you want, color or black and white?" And I said, 2 rolls of color, please. And he gave me Kodachrome. And that is the greatest film of all time. And so, a few days later, I went out walking around trying to see, well, what is it that I would photograph? And I didn't know how to read the exposure, so I had a piece of paper that was in the Kodak box.
Yeah.
And I read,
No light meter then either, is it?
No, the sun is behind you, it's this
Yeah.
exposure.
Yeah.
Anyway, the first 2 rolls of film had some interesting pictures in them, to me at the time.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, there's so much here, and I just have to figure out how to be faster and in the right place at the right time. And when I had those 2 rolls of film developed, a young guy, just a year or 2 younger than me, was at the next light box in the lab looking at his pictures, and it was Tony Ray Johns. We were both art directors. We were not yet photographers. Yeah. And we were looking at each other's pictures after looking at our own, and we decided to go out shooting together. And so for most of that first year, Tony and I photographed in color on the streets of New York. And then at night, we'd get our film back and look at them projected in my little apartment. And we would talk about, you should be closer, faster, more off-center, more of this. I mean, we were trying to find a language together.
Yeah.
And finally, Tony's visa ran out, and he came back to Europe, to England, and he became the Tony Ray Jones that influenced Martin Parr and a whole generation of English photographers.
And was it a conscious decision to shoot colour film? Were you aware of Winogrand and Robert Frank and those photographers shooting black and white before that, or was it? I
knew nothing.
Okay.
I didn't know photography was an art form.
Yeah.
Because my sense of it was utilitarian.
Yeah.
Or it was for weddings and bar mitzvahs and stuff like that, or advertising.
Sure.
Or stories in the magazines, but I didn't know of it as an art form.
Yeah, sure.
Or that anybody practiced it in a kind of personal way. Yeah. But once I saw what Robert did and how he moved, and I was a very physical young guy. I had played baseball, in high school and college. I was a long-distance swimmer. I raced on my college swimming team. And physicality and dancing, which I love and still do. So I saw the balletic aspect of it as a way of getting into relationships with the subject that is disappearing right in front of you. Yeah. At least that's how I began to understand it. Yeah. It didn't come immediately on the first moment. It became only through the frustration of not being able to get to the thing that happened in time.
Yeah. And did you develop a kind of strategy when you went out onto the street? Was there certain parts of the city that you would head towards, or certain events, or would you just walk around your neighborhood and it so well that you could find these instances, or would you head out with a preconceived idea in mind?
Fifth Avenue.
Yeah,
Fifth Avenue is the boulevard of dreams and stories in American life, anyway, New York life.
Yeah.
And it's a place where you can see the high and low at the same moment. You can see some billionaire coming out of a building holding a Tiffany something in his hands, and you could see a messenger, schlepping along on the street with an oversized box of something. And fashion and beauty and business. And, I watched that and felt really good about it. But when Tony and I were beginning our studies, you might say, we found that almost every weekend in the spring and summer in New York City, there's a parade. And a parade is an incredible camouflage. So we would go to the parades, not for the parade itself, but for the bystanders, so that we could be sort of camouflaged into the crowd, and we would learn how to get close, how to break the social distance and get within an intimate, almost hug place with someone, and be able to photograph right in their faces without them feeling like you're breaking the social distance. You're in my face. And so we learned to be invisible.
Sure.
Basically, that's the practice we learned.
It's a later question, but I wanted to talk a bit about how. Do you think people were, at that time, I guess, less aware of the camera or less understanding of what the camera was, so you were able to make those types of pictures? Because I look at street photography today and I want, cameras are so ubiquitous. They're everywhere. Everybody has a camera now on their smartphone. Yeah. And could you make the same types of images today, do you think? I
think that public consciousness for fame, after all this stuff on the internet that people post on, TikTok and Facebook and Instagram is all about, look at me, I want to be famous. Back in the 60s, it was unusual for someone to think of themselves as material for photography. I can tell you that very often, we carried the camera wrapped around our wrist, and so it's always in our hand, and it came up to the eye quickly and went away quickly. But if people saw you with a camera looking at them, so often they would turn around and look behind them, thinking there must be something going on there, because it couldn't be them. So there was a kind of overall innocence on the part of everybody on the street, because they couldn't consider themselves a subject. Today, that's very different. People want that. They want fame or publicity in some way. You feel like that. They want to be famous for being famous rather than for doing something. And I think that changed the game a lot. And so we had that cover back then. And often, what's really interesting to me is that so many people say to me when they see photographs of mine on Instagram, they say, gosh, I wish I had been alive back then, and the time seemed so innocent. And in retrospect, it really was. Because no one had a smartphone, people made eye contact on the street. And so there was a kind of sexiness to the street. People are constantly watching for, hey, look at, I want to fall in love. I want to meet the person of my dreams. Or aren't they interesting? Or look at that outfit. It was much more of an engagement, a social, observational engagement. Whereas today, people are on their phone, walking down the street, only looking up to make sure they don't bump into something. But basically, they're in another world rather than the reality of the moment.
I was looking at Bruce Davidson's Subway book recently, because it's one of my all-time favorite books. And I had the same thought, because it's you sit on the subway today or on the underground in London, and everybody is on their phone. That book wouldn't have been able to be. You wouldn't be able to shoot that today. It just wouldn't work in the same way. So it's.
The subways used to be one of the sexiest places to be. As a young, I'm speaking from an 86-year-old position, remembering what it was like to be 25. And there was something about watching who's across the aisle from you, and sometimes flirtations, and give and take, or just starting a conversation. I had some of the most interesting conversations of my young life with total strangers on the subway because they had a question, or you commented on a baseball team, or you commented on the politics of the moment, or whatever was happening. And that doesn't happen so often now.
Yeah.
And frankly, I miss that. And I think that our general public today misses that kind of interaction.
I agree. Yeah.
You know.
I just wanted to talk a bit about your cameras, actually. So you started with a Pentax 35mm.
Yeah.
But then you moved on to large format, right?
Well, I did, but that was in 1976. So I basically had 14 years of working with a 35mm, and as soon as I could afford a Leica, I mean, I recognized the different way of looking that the Leica provides. Because, when you bring a camera up to your face, a camera like a single lens reflex, Pentax, like that, it blocks your vision because you're looking in the center. So the camera covers both eyes for that moment.
Sure.
With a Leica, with the window of the camera being off to the side, as soon as you do this, your left eye, if you're right eye centric, your left eye keeps the world in view. So you can see what's coming and happening at the same time as you're looking at making the frame in the camera. So as a photographic instrument, it is truly a work of art.
For street photography, there's nothing to compare.
And it's fast and quiet. It doesn't draw attention. You can bring it up to your face and pass it in front of you and make a picture like that because you can see the frame without having to hold and focus too much. With a camera like the Leica, the focus is really about an inch. You move it about an inch like that. Whereas with a camera with a single lens reflex, you have to keep rolling the camera to get the focus. And that takes up time. And time is what photography is about.
Sure.
So anything that saves you time and makes you invisible.
Yeah. Especially if you're finding those decisive moments, which they're there and they're gone in a flash. So you need to be nimble.
Well, I mean, if you think about what photography is recording, it's recording a fragmentary sensation that you intuit as being potential. All these things are vague, fragmentary, potential, intuition. They're not substantial, but they're essential. They are what define you as the being you are and the artist you are. So if you're looking to be a photographic artist, then you're going to be searching for your identity on the street. You're not looking for pictures. You're looking for what is it that makes me go, because that is inspiration, right? You intake your breath, which means your system, your sensory being has been shocked by something in front of you that manifests itself out of the chaos of everyday reality. You're looking for these moments of transformation. Transformation is art.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what art does. It transforms ordinary stuff into maybe lyrical, poetic, meaningful stuff. Yeah. So I think finding an instrument that was right for the street, for that temperament, was what.
And when you moved on to large format, did your practice change as well? Did your experience of the street change? The things that you were looking for?
I made that move because of photography. Back in the 60s, at the very time that I began photography, John Charkovsky became the director of photography at the Museum of Modern Art after Steichen. Steichen was a very commercial guy, and he was sort of a sentimentalist as well. And I think photography under his guidance was mushy in a way. John came in, and he was a photographer himself and a tough photographer, and he immediately had a sense that street photography was unfolding in front of him. And he opened his office so that anybody could walk in and show him photographs. So within the first year of my making photographs, I was able to go in and introduce myself to him. And he bought a picture of mine and he used it in his first exhibition, his first grand scale exhibition. And he hung it next to Robert Frank's photograph. And there I was, a 24-year-old, and I had a picture in a museum. I mean, how did that happen? And I really think that John ultimately educated a whole generation of photographers. He taught us how to think and speak about photographs. Because before that, you said, I like that. That's nice. That's good. That's tough.
Yeah.
But we had nothing to say.
Yeah.
And his understanding of the medium and his way of expressing himself gave us a language to hold on to and begin to think more clearly about the potential of it. And one of the things that John said, this is to answer your question about large formatting and change of subject matter. He said, look, what does a camera do? A photographer picks it up at a moment of revelation and presses the button, and all the camera does is it describes what's in front of the camera. Description is everything. Now, when I heard that, I thought, well, if description is everything, a black and white photograph doesn't describe everything because it's missing the color. And color has temperament. It tells you the time of day, the season you're in, the way flesh looks in sunlight, the way colors bounce around. And you know, suddenly if someone is sitting on the grass, the underside of their chin, the bottom of their nose, the underside of their eyebrows, they're all green from the flash of color. And when you look at Impressionist paintings, you see these strange colors because they were observing that too. So I thought, I need to describe everything. And at a certain point in my working life, I felt that the 35 millimeter camera, as beautiful as Kodachrome was, I wanted to make very big prints in the early 70s. Nobody was doing that. Everybody made what was basically an 11 by 14 inch print. I don't know what that is. A3
maybe?
A3 maybe. Yeah.
A3. Yeah.
I don't measure that way. Anyway, I wanted to go big because Kodachrome is what Technicolor movies were made of, and you could see a Technicolor image on the screen that was 50 feet across. So why can't you have big pictures? And I thought, I have to move away from 35 millimeter to get to a scale of a negative that would allow me to make monster prints. And so I've moved out of a sense of frustration, actually, towards the view camera. And I never thought of myself as a view camera user because those guys on the West Coast, Ansel Adams, Weston, etc., they were like the old, F-64 group.
Exactly.
And although I admired the work, I didn't quite get it. I was a young upstart from the East Coast, and I wanted action and dynamics. So I thought, maybe I have to get this camera and find a way of blending the two ideas, 35 millimeter street sensibility with a large format descriptive power.
What kind of large format camera did you use? Was it could you hold it, or did you have to have it on a tripod? You couldn't hold it. Yeah.
It was 8 by 10 inches.
Oh wow, so it's a really
it was
large.
Big. It was. This is the part that's really kind of amazing. I bought it on a working trip out in the West. I was in Salt Lake City, and I saw a camera. A photographer was going out of business. And so I went in and I said, do you have any 8 by 10 cameras? He said, yeah, I got a basement full of them. He took me downstairs, and I bought 3 Deardorff wooden view cameras, 2 810s and a 4.5. And at some point, a few years later, when I was in Chicago, where the Deardorff was made, I was having a little problem with my camera, and I brought it to Chicago. I was having a show at the museum there, but I brought the camera to Chicago, and I took it to Deardorff, and I brought it in, and an older man came over, and he said, He said, what's the problem? And I said, I can't, when I crank it forward, the gears are slightly out of sync, and I can't undo them. And he said, I can fix that in no time at all. He said, I made this camera. And I said, how do you know? He said, I only made 2 like this in March of 1938. And I said, I was born in March of 1938. And he said, well, this is the first one, and the second one had a slightly different thing. And he said, so this was in the first 2 weeks of March. I said I was born on March. So anyway, that camera was made when I was made.
Wow.
And it was.
What
I
coincidence.
mean, it was thrilling to know that, to meet the man who made the camera and to have him repair it.
Amazing.
So, there are crazy coincidences like that are sort of...
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So you're known for your work on the streets of New York, but also other cities around the world. And your upcoming exhibition in Spain explores the work that you made around Europe, which is later, right? And I just wanted to talk a bit about how those travels around Europe. What was the type of image you were looking for different in Europe, and how did it influence your work back in America later?
Good. I mean, they're essential questions, really.
Yeah.
What happened was, for 3 years before 1966, after Tony left, Gary and I would meet up every day. We both lived on the Upper West Side within a few blocks of each other, and we would meet at a Greasy Spoon on Columbus Avenue, and then we would walk through Central Park and down on Fifth Avenue. We spent the entire day going up and down Fifth Avenue until he had to go home to pick up he was divorced at that point. He had to pick up his kids and do that. So, and my wife at the time and I would go with Gary, and we'd make dinner for his kids because it was a little bit too much for him.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
he was a kind of jittery, jumpy guy, wonderful human being. I love him and loved him and love him still for his generosity and his spirit.
Yeah.
But it was he and I on the streets every day. And even though he was 10 years older, we had a Bronx relationship. We both were born in the Bronx. And in fact, we met on the train coming back from the Bronx one day. We both had gone to visit our parents. Anyway, and then we were joined in 1965 by Todd Papageorge. So we became a little trio. And then in 1965, at the end of 65, I shot a commercial job. The only way to make a living in those days was to shoot commercial work.
Sure.
I met Robert on a commercial job.
Yeah.
Gary shot commercial work. Lee Friedlander shot record covers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I did a commercial job, and I made enough money in 1 week in California to actually go away for a year. And so in 1966, I bought tickets on the SS France for an August sailing to London, to Southampton. And I told my wife at the time, let's run away. We can rent our apartment out. I've got this money. We'll buy a car. I bought a Volvo delivered to Primrose Hill.
Excellent.
There was a Volvo,
choice.
the only Volvo place in London.
Yeah.
I picked up the car there. And I didn't have any idea about what I was going to do, but I knew I wanted to just travel over Europe because when I grew up in the Bronx, my entire neighborhood, my block in particular, was all Irish immigrants, Italians from Puglia and Napoli and Sicilia, and Poles, Russians, Eastern European Jews, everybody who had fled pogroms in Eastern Europe or World War II.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in a neighborhood that felt totally European. Even the markets were like European markets. They were outdoor markets. That there were no supermarkets then. And so my entire young life was lived out on the streets with people playing dominoes in cars. I mean, I didn't know I was in New York as a little kid.
Yeah.
I was living in this, people spoke strange languages on my block. And there were 3,000 people on my block.
Right.
So that was the size of the village I recently lived in Tuscany for 10 years. I only had 3,000 people. So my adventure was just to go and see this older world. What I learned was that as a single person rather than part of a trio, my decisions were my own. And I think that year, and particularly this period in Spain, because I lived for 6 of those 12 months in Spain with flamenco gypsies that I met by chance. And that life, that flamenco life, was different because they thought of themselves as black.
Okay.
The rest of us were los payos, the whiteys.
Yeah.
They were black. They made a music that was not Spanish music. It was gypsy music that had traveled probably from India over North Africa, as opposed to from India through Eastern Europe. I mean,
Sure.
the Romani are different.
Yeah.
They're more horse traders
Yeah.
and other kinds of activities. But the Spanish gypsies were musical, and it was a whole language. And so living there and being out on the streets of Malaga every day. My wife studied guitar with the maestro, and she became, they called her La Dimona, La Prodige, because she absorbed all of his teachings to the point where he dropped every other student and maintained her. And we traveled all over Spain seeking out flamenco singers and dancers and aficionados. So that life had many layers. It had the interior flamenco life. I mean, there I was living with gypsies at the very same time that Kudelka was living with the Romani.
Yeah.
I mean, how about that for a coincidence in 1966 and 67?
Yeah.
And what I discovered was that I began to have my own instincts as a single photographer rather than as part of a trio. And I developed a sense of my identity as a photographer and as a man. I think, to be 28 and living in the kind of macho society of Spain under Franco's dictatorship kind of molded me in a way that I couldn't have anticipated before.
Yeah.
I just thought I was going to go on an adventure and see Europe.
Yeah.
But that 6 months of learning how to be on the streets of Malaga and developing a kind of sensibility and even a different kind of picture making. I went from more central, an image that occupied the center of the frame, to trying to disperse my imagery across the field so that things were happening simultaneously all over the frame. It was as if there was a different way of considering what made a photograph. And when you come up against something like that on your own with no one to talk to about it, and I wasn't processing the film. I shot 700 rolls of film in that year, color and black and white, equally, 360 of each, roughly, undeveloped. So I had no way of processing my ideas. I just had to believe it's all going to come out. It's all there. Yeah. So in a sense, it happened by feel. And feel is really our divining rod, It's like that thing that when people go to find water, they take a stick and they hold the two ends of a kind of Y-shaped stick. I've seen someone do it. He once found water on a property I owned upstate New York. I walked around with this guy, and he held the stick, and at some point, he put the stick in the ground. He said, "Dig here." And I said, "How do you know?" He said, "The stick told me." I said, "How? How did the stick tell you?" He said, "I can't say for sure, but the stick is a living thing. It was a living thing, and it knows where the water is." He said, "and I can feel the vibrations in my hands." So I had a digger come in, it dug, and 20 feet down it hit water. And this was on a stony hillside.
Incredible.
So the stick was the divining rod. And in a sense, each of us is a divining rod for our sensibility. I mean, after all, what do you trust? You have to trust something when the moment on the street reveals itself to you. It's your moment. It's defining who you are to yourself.
And I really think that way of shooting did define your work, because when I think of your work, it often doesn't have one central focal point. There's often different things happening within the same frame. And do you think the large format helped you organize an image, like choreograph an image like that? Was that rather than being on 35mm, you could step back and let the scene play out in front of you a bit more?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
35mm taught me to be quick in deciding things and to trying to see all over the frame. 8x10, when you put your head under the dark cloth, you're looking at a screen that's 8x10 inches. It's like a monitor. And it's upside down and backwards, but it's challenging for that way, but it allows you to make a decision about the precision of things near at 6 or 8 feet and things far at infinity, and you're trying to put them together. You're trying to pull all that focus into a plane, because photography is a two-dimensional plane of three-dimensional reality. And so I would photograph at f/90. I had a special lens. It was an old lens, and I took it to a guy in New York he repaired all the cameras for the whole photography world. And Marty said, there's enough room in this, I could make 64 go to 90.
I didn't even know
and so he f/90'd me, which meant that I could focus on something far, far away and pull it in. And it was still big enough to blow up to 8 or 10 feet, and you can see every bit of information in there. And there's something so incredibly satisfying in seeing that. Something far away could be rendered so that it was actually part of the meaning of the picture, not just something in the background, but something in the background that you intended to be seen in relation to things up close. So that the change of intention that the 8x10 provides, it isn't as instantaneous as the street, but if I had started with the large format, I wouldn't have been able to make it to the street. But starting on the street and learning how to be quick allowed me to transfer that to 8x10 in terms of an aesthetic and a sense of understanding the scope of the things I wanted to embrace and bring into the picture for you to deal with. So, one learns. It's a process.
Yeah.
Every art form is a process
Absolutely.
of coming to terms with the materials and your own sensibility.
And becoming a master of those tools as well. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult camera to operate, the 10x8 camera. It is.
It's a lot to carry around.
Yeah.
And when I was photographing inside Ground Zero after 9/11, I carried 2 Leicas. I carried a 6x7 Mamiya, and I carried my 4x5 Leica, and often a video camera. So I was a clanking machine man, covering everything with all formats because I needed to be both fast, things happened and disappeared, but I also wanted to render them historically accurate and deep so that they would enlarge to. In fact, at the Venice Biennale, I made a print that was 22 feet long so that the visitors to the American Pavilion could actually stand within the site itself and get a gut feeling of what it was like to be inside Ground Zero. So, and only with the view camera could I render that meaningful.
That life-size print. So you came back from Europe. And then you started shooting again in New York and all over America. Were there any books that you made in that period that you'd like to talk about, which really stood out, which were...
Well, I didn't publish my first book until 1978.
Okay.
At that time, publishing books was really difficult because... as I was once told by the guy who was the head of Aperture Publishing Company, he said, Joel, the worldwide book market for photography is 2,500 books. He said, if Robert Frank came to me today with the Americans, I wouldn't be able to publish it because we couldn't sell enough. He said, so when it was published in 1958, it was a huge risk. And of course, it became a classic. But he said, we have to be so careful because we can't sell, no one wants photography books. And it's true that photography was not it wasn't really a commercial medium in terms of galleries. There was, in 1976, there was only one gallery in New York City, and that was Lee Whitkin. And in 1965, there was only one gallery in New York City. It was called the Underground Gallery, and it was in a Chinese laundry below street level in Greenwich Village, and I saw Ansel Adams showing in that little gallery,
Wow.
and the pictures were $25 each. Now,
I hope you bought one.
if I wish I had. I didn't have the money. But if you think about a master like Ansel Adams showing in a Chinese laundry below street level in New York for $25, that gives you some sense where would young photographers, I mean, how much could I charge for a photograph if I had the good fortune to show it? It was insignificant, and basically, and all of us were doing it for love. And so when I came back from Europe, John Sharkovsky looked at some pictures I did. I shot from a moving car while I was traveling, because if you're traveling a lot, you're inside a car, and the window of the car is like a camera. I thought I was driving a camera the whole time. And I was shooting out the window at 1,000th of a second, which could freeze everything. And he saw these pictures, and he said, this is like the first conceptual photography I've ever seen. He said, I'm going to give you a show.
Amazing.
And so I came back, and within that first year, I had a show at MoMA of pictures made from a moving car. And we're taking those very same prints to Malaga, and we're creating a room within this year-long journey around Europe. That's what this show in Malaga is about. It's called Europa. And I start in London, and I drive all around England, and then over to, through Wales and Scotland and Cornwall, and then over to Ireland, and then back to the continent. And so there are 11 rooms in the show, and there are 11 countries in there, and one room will be devoted to the MoMA show. Because, in a way, it said, even if you're stuck in a car and you're moving at 100 kilometers an hour, sometimes you see something out the window, and if you stop to go get it, it'll be gone. So the only thing you can do is reach for it at 100 kilometers an hour and see if you can get it, and it will be far away. Can a photograph be made that is coherent from that point of view? John felt that they were, and that it offered a new sort of minor revelation that you could see and shoot on the move like that and not give up anything, but actually get something unexpected.
Yeah.
So that'll be part of the show.
That'll be part of the show. And what was it? Lastly, when you look back at your archive, have the pictures changed from how they felt at the time when you first captured them? What do you think time does to a great photograph?
Well, I think it does it to every photograph.
Yeah.
And you're actually bringing up something that's incredibly important to me right now. At 86, I have the time now, because the time is fleeting. I have to make the time now, since we can digitize everything easily. I've just digitized 250,000 photographs of color and black and white. Every black and white photograph I ever made. I spend time every day looking at works of mine from the 60s and 70s, because it's a gathering moment. It's a moment of reflection. And what I'm seeing, or at least trying to understand, is the person who made those photographs, who was just waking up, is that person still me today? Have I stayed true to that alignment through the course of my life? Has my variations, have they been within the scope of that direction? So in a way, I'm alive now to that early work, because most of that went unseen. Remember, there were no publishers. There were very few galleries. So there was no way to get it out there back then. So now there's an opportunity to kind of restore, for me, just the way Vivian Maier is discovered and Saul Leiter is discovered. Those people worked in a kind of quiet isolation. Yeah. Saul was a commercial photographer who did fashion. Gary sort of wrote Saul off in a way. He said, he's a fashion photographer.
Yeah.
But he was making these painterly, beautiful, kind of blurry, misty pictures. I mean, they're romantic and schmaltzy. Yeah. That's how we thought of them then. But now they play a role in time. And Vivian Maier was unknown, right? A nanny who took pictures. But she was really good. And so it's of great value that she's discovered today. So in a way, I'm doing that with myself. I'm looking at that undiscovered, invisible work to see, does it hold up? Does it have power or valence? And what did it teach me? So in a way, I have a show on at Tate Modern right now that's about that question between color and black and white. And most of those pictures are from the early 60s when I began. So I recommend to the listeners, if you're in London and you're free to go to Tate Modern, you might see a show there that we've been talking about a time period of. So, yeah, I think that I feel a degree of satisfaction when I look at those pictures. They're not so far from the sensibility that I've arrived at over time, although the subject matter isn't something that I would make photographs about today because it's a young artist's reach. Nonetheless, there's still some very telling moments in there that I'm shocked to discover. And sometimes, and I print, I still print. I have a studio here in London, and I've been printing regularly for the last year or so.
Do you print your own pictures?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, wow.
I do. I have have a large format digital printer, really what I think is the best of them all. Yeah. And I've been making prints on a beautiful paper that we can use today that's a platinum paper.
Yeah.
But you can print inkjet on it, 12 inks, and they make super beautiful, sensual photographs.
Wow.
So I feel like contemporary practices have liberated me from the darkroom. I spent probably 25 years in the darkroom or more, and doing color and black and white. And now to be able to be out in the open without all that chemistry.
Yeah. and still retain that quality. Which is,
even better. I tell you. Prints today are more complete. I often say if Ansel was alive today, he'd print digitally.
Really?
Because the limits of color printing in the 70s and 80s and on were that the paper had the color in it, and it could only render thousands of colors. But today, with computer technology, you can have variations that are in the millions of colors. The subtlety is so vast that the prints of the past look kind of flimsy in comparison. They are the prints of the time. They are the best that you could make then. They're like daguerreotypes in a way. They come from another era.
Sure.
So the prints I made in the 70s are now 50 years old. And most of them have held up decently, But these new prints are quite permanent. They have sort of 200-year life. Wow. So anyone buying a print today can count on it looking like that for the life of the time they own it, anyway. And they're joyous to look at because they're so richly described.
Just last question. Are there any street photographers that you are interested in shooting today?
Yeah, a lot.
Okay.
In fact, I'm doing a new book for a publisher here in London in which I decided rather than me pick all the pictures, I would pick 7 photographers that I think are of merit today. And each of them would choose 7 photographers who are working today who they think are of merit. Great. And that way, it's sort of an umbrella. I'm on the point of the umbrella, and they're the spokes, and then they're going to pick the photographers that they think of them, and they will write an essay about each one, and I will write an essay about each of the ones I've chosen. And so there are guys like Matt Stewart here, who's a London photographer who's just great, and Gus Powell, who's an American photographer. And There's Brian Carlson, who's a young 26-year-old quirky American photographer who occasionally works for me and does scans for me. And there's Melissa O'Shaughnessy, who's a wonderful woman photographer with a great point of view. Melanie Einzig, Joshua Yara, who's a Spanish photographer. There's lots of people who are interesting, and they've chosen a whole range of photographers who I don't know personally, but whose work I've been looking at, and I'm thinking, well, these some interesting people who are pushing beyond the iPhone picture. They're all using cameras. They print. They're trying to deal with the quality of contemporary urban life and the mess we're making of our planet without necessarily being photographers who are talking about the destruction of the planet, but they're looking at the ways we defile our environment. I mean, Brian photographs the detritus of modern life, but he sees it in a wonderfully humorous, playful way, and his pictures are kind of shocking in the sense that the stuff that we throw away winds up being blown around in the streets and plasters itself against our reality. And sometimes it's a message. It's as if he sees the messages that are being projected through the thrown away stuff of our lives. Anyway, everybody has a different reading of contemporary life. And I think that this book, which will probably be out next year, because I've been late in making it all happen.
You've been busy.
I've been busy, right. And, at the same time, in this past year, a film was made about myself and my wife. And two London filmmakers spent a year with us in Tuscany, in London, in America. And this film has just started its premieres in film festivals. And the film is called Two Strangers Trying Not to Kill Each Other. It's the story of a marriage. But that and going to festivals now has broken up my time. So this book is a little late, but it is coming. And I think it will be a kind of compendium of modern life, seen from a whole bunch of mentalities, and all over the world, not just American photographers or London photographers.
Who's the publisher?
It will be Quora here in London. They're a real publisher, but they have a new director of acquisitions, who I've known from earlier publishing I've done, and he is trying to build them into being a real photographic entity, and this will be one of their lead books. So it's great.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, Joel, thank you so much for joining me on the big interview. And
it was really a delicious interview. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much
for all these really intricate questions.
Yeah, that was
I
great.
Appreciate
very,
it
very, very enjoyable. That's it for this edition of The Big Interview. It was produced by Gunnar Grunlid and edited by Lily Austin. From me, Matthew Beaman, thanks very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.